Welcome to The Other Side of the Table with me, Tom Frogger. Raising money in biotech, tech bio and life sciences is crucial and complicated. In this podcast, we'll sit down with specialist investors to understand how they see the market, how they assess potential deals, and the mistakes they see time and again that you can avoid. This week on The Other Side of the Table, I'm with Sean Kendall, partner at Arch Venture Partners. We're talking about his view on the market, including my favourite quote of the series so far, "It's hard to fall out of the basement window," why everything starts with high quality science, and how to tell if a market is big enough for investors. Stay with us for all that and more. So we're back on the other side of the table, and this week I'm really pleased to be joined by Sean Kendall. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to talking to you today. So Sean, we always start with kind of your view on the market, and this will go out a little later, but we're recording this at the end of January. And from your point of view, from what you see, from where you sit at Arch, how do you see the biotech investment market at the moment? What's happening out there? Where are we compared to where we've been? It'd be really interesting to get your take.
Yeah. Well, I mean, compared to where we've been, I think certainly some measure of cautious optimism. It's certainly been tough. I think, of course, the good news in this space is good science is always good science. The challenge,
Yes.
of course, is how we build it from there, and what resources we're able to bring to bear to do so. I think we do hope that things will be getting better and are seeing a little bit of warmth, but it do think it may be a bit of fits and spurts from here, but certainly better than where we've been.
Yeah.
Hard to fall out the basement window, as some of my colleagues say.
I like that. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think there's lingering caution as well as optimism, right? I think there's who knows what the next event will be, and there's an element of being prepared for that, I guess, out there.
Certainly.
Yeah, and in terms of sort of the last year or so, obviously, some of, as you say, a lot of the caution and a lot of the issues seem to have been driven more by macroeconomic factors and global factors than, as you say, by the quality of the science. Because I mean, there's still amazing things happening, and there's still brilliant research being done. From your point of view, has there been anything else that's kind of influenced the slowdown in the market outside of the big global issues that we're all facing?
I mean, I think there's always some measure of maybe exuberance
Mm,
and fast followers and people kind of seeing how things kind of play out as some of these initial innovations move forward. I think we tend to fortunately have a series of pretty impressive new developments, of course, and these get different degrees of amplification based on the not just the external factors, but perhaps also the experience of some of those who might have come in from other sectors that
mm,
have only really kind of dipped their toes in the space, and then there's sometimes a bit of a response coming on the tail of that. But
yes.
I do think that this is a space that really, we really have had some breakthrough insights in a variety of different areas of biotech, and I think that it's going to be. I think it's been said by many people long before me that we're in the century of biology, but I
Mm.
think a lot of what we're starting to see is really indicating that.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those that the technologies are starting to mature, right? And that there's always been this excitement and potential, but now people really are starting to understand how to use these technologies and how to have an impact with them, it seems.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So given the sort of the market being where it is, this cautious optimism that I've been told was the most overused phrase at JP Morgan this year. um, how how for you personally, and every investor will answer this question differently, how's that affected how you're looking at deals and how you're looking at investments and what you're looking for in a company, perhaps?
Sure. I mean, I think for us, for better or worse, the bar has always been relatively high
Mm,
in terms of the defensibility, et cetera, et cetera. The As an early stage investor, we're often we often either lead or co-lead the
hmm.
early rounds, build about a good chunk of or involved in kind of the founding of a significant portion of the portfolio.
Yeah.
I think, in many ways, starting with high quality science, it's still the way things are. That said, as especially here in Europe, I think there's always been an awful lot of opportunity at a certain stage. I think not everything necessarily needs to be built. We've seen a lot of very high quality companies in this market at a certain sort of stage where some of the maybe curious capital that was in for a little
Mm,
bit has evaporated, and that round has gotten a little bit tougher to raise. So if we can if we can be supportive, and if there's good science there to help build from perhaps a different stage than we might have gotten involved in the past, I think
yes.
that we're still interested in that.
Yeah, I see. So science leading everything, and actually, sort of, you touched on something there that'd probably be worth us talking a little bit about. In that, you're very active in the European market these days. That listeners will be able to hear that you're not from Europe originally, so you may have a perspective on the differences, I suppose. There's kind of a view from the European side about the differences between the European market and the US market. How do you see the differences? What have been the changing trends between the two recently? Is the gap closing? Is it getting bigger? Where are we at in terms of the comparisons there?
Yeah, I mean, hesitate to make any terribly broad statements, especially
Of
since
course, yeah.
maybe one thing to note in Europe is just the variety of ecosystems.
Hmm.
Even in the U.S., we have this across different cities, states, institutions that take a different kind of approach to the way that they might spin out, build, and recruit around different technologies. I will say we have always been we're drawn in by and have always been impressed by the high quality of scientific research
Yeah.
in UK and Europe, and that's what has brought me over here.
Hmm.
A number of our best deals based anywhere have had some significant component of European intellectual property, if not more. Uh, the I'd say, at risk of stating the obvious, one of the big differences is perhaps in the states there's some measure of commonality across kind of the legal structures one may have to
Yeah,
navigate.
true,
I think
true.
one thing that we're doing here is we're not. I don't think we want to be. Uh, uh, I think we want to be able to go to where the science is being created, but that does require kind of different literacies and different geographies. And so I think here, we syndicate early on with companies that we build in the
Mm,
States, but I think here in Europe we want to make sure that we can be a good partner to those groups that are close to the science in their own ecosystems and work with them to help build and you take it hopefully have a bring some mutual benefit in terms of kind of long-term committed capital. We
yeah.
tend to build for the long haul, and having kind of the local Sherpas who know the ecosystem and kind of unique aspects of each geography here.
Yeah, and it's a fair point. I think it's easy from the outside to underestimate the complexity of Europe, right? Not just language wise, but culturally, things work very differently in, let's say, Italy compared to the UK or France or Germany or what have you. And I guess there's things to navigate from that point of view. Um, do you well, okay, so a lot of this podcast is about how do we help people who've got good ideas to translate that into investable ideas, right? And so
Mm.
that's kind of the crux of what I wanted to get to. I'm going to start with the negatives, and I'm really interested in. You've seen a lot of pitches, Sean, I'm sure. Um, what do you see as the most common issues with pitches, the most common errors that people make, the things that kind of put you off when you see a pitch for what otherwise may be a good idea, but of course you've got a limited time to assess this stuff.
Sure. Yeah, I could speak to one or a few I see from my end, and
Mm,
some of these are idiosyncratic to Arch and our approach. Um, while sometimes we may back companies that are based around perhaps one kind of core asset or some scientific achievements in that regard. Generally speaking, we're looking for a key novel scientific insight or breakthrough or something that is a bit of a defensible differentiation or something that can be potentially pretty big, something
yeah.
more than something more than kind of deep expertise applied on maybe a an already aggressively attacked target or something of that
Hmm.
sort. So what I might say is sometimes, and I understand in a lot of ways the bias. There's wonderful rigor and expertise in Europe, but sometimes I'm interested in understanding, what really drove the science, what the platform component is, what the kind of core breakthrough insight behind something might be
Yes.
before jumping into kind of the unique head-to-head performance of kind of the say a lead asset versus
Right. Yeah.
something
Yeah.
else. Or I think it's common for people who, and this happens in the States as well, but for people who spend a lot of time in a very specific area to compare themselves to, just the other technologies in their niche versus either the broader question or the other directions that core nugget of insight could potentially lead that could have value, or how we really think big about building a high quality company on very cool new science.
Hmm. Yeah, I see. So get into that core of differentiation, I suppose, and what makes this unique,
Yeah.
rather than the detail of the data.
Yeah, the details always got to come, but oftentimes I think it's good to start
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this has come through strongly in everything you've said, to be fair, is that the scientific insight, the scientific breakthrough is key to your investment decisions. Um, what then are the other factors that you tend to look at? What are the most important things to you? And I know every firm has their policy around this, so it may be tied into what Arch looks for as well. But for you, science first, then what are the things that follow that?
Sure. I mean, the team, of course, is always a big one. I'm
Hmm.
not saying that a company needs to come to us fully baked with the whole team. Oftentimes, that's part of the value that we might try to bring, and will be part of
Yes.
the investment decision. Is this okay? We've got something wonderful here. Can we be a good partner and help fill in the rest of the gaps or needs here to the degree that we can? And then once those problems are solved, then we bring in the bolus of capital, and we're hopefully off to the races. Um, the other components might be uh, maybe not. Sometimes we see very good science, but on perhaps a total market that might not quite hit the bar
Right.
that we might need.
Yeah.
And sometimes those are very high quality. We have folk that we work with a lot, and certain funds that might be excellent partners and are always happy to connect entrepreneurs with them. We're a relatively sizable fund, and so we generally to kind of take the risks and the swings that we need to. We usually need outcomes that can be significant, or total markets if it's
Mm.
depending on the technology, that can be relatively sizable.
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting point, and I appreciate that the actual answer is going to be it depends, but so how do you tend to look at whether a market is big enough? Because I think that may be something that people who are doing the research can struggle with a little bit. Is what is a big enough market?
Yeah, I'll say sometimes this is also an iterative process with the
Hmm.
inventors, and one usually the first initial area that you're penetrating doesn't necessarily have to be
Yeah.
massive, right? If you can get a high quality beachhead that proves out the rest of the technology or kind of expands adoption, and then that can potentially be pretty interesting. I sometimes these things are relatively opaque, and you have to have the right
Mm-mm.
reasons to believe that a space might grow quite a bit. A case in point there might be VizGen. When we got VizGen up off the ground, spatial transcriptomics, we knew that single cell RNA-seq was taking off. Speaking to kind of KOLs and others in our network, we heard interest generally in putting the data into spatial context. There were indicators that things like the Human Cell Atlas would be coming underway and so on, and these kind of big science projects that might provide a lot of appetite for this kind of technology. We also
Yes.
saw that there was a lot of interest in collaboration with Xiaowei Zhuang's lab, and so you know you're sometimes you're not looking at a major extant market or a
Mm.
major patient population and coming back from there. But if you have enough of the other pieces of the puzzle and you know that it's somewhere between something big and potentially something really big,
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
it's often worth the swing. Again, that technology in particular, I think had been relatively de-risked. There were plenty of papers
Right.
published on it, and the prototype instruments were running pretty well.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that that is a big part of it, right? Is how much risk is there? More risk is going to need a bigger potential outcome. More challenge is going to need a bigger potential outcome, right? If a technology seems particularly difficult, then there needs to be a better payoff at the end of it, I suppose, because difficult usually means expensive, right?
That is yeah, that's very true. And
Yeah.
then start thinking about everything else you can do to de-risk it, be that team, be that
Mm.
others you can bring in to help build the syndicate, other advantages from your network, etc.
Yeah.
Other sometimes other intellectual property. I think that's another thing perhaps to note is especially in times like these. I think in the top of the market, you see a phenomenon where a lot of people with similar kind of good, smart people tend to see what's going on in the
Mm.
world, and oftentimes tend to have somewhat similar insights at the same time. And sometimes this can build a set of companies pursuing something similar at the same time. In difficult times, sometimes it makes, or even actually, honestly, in the best of times, it
Yeah.
can make a lot of sense to really try to build a category leader by bringing in the best of intellectual property and getting the best teams to work together to win on this problem and create value, as opposed to kind of competing and
Mm.
either enabling an incumbent or creating other barriers. I think that's something that is perhaps always an interesting thing to think about, and perhaps something we can sometimes help with. But is who else in your space might be working on something like this? If you could bring in, who would you collaborate with if you could? Perhaps you're competing for publications and so on, but if you were working together for to solve a problem or get an
Yes.
economic return. Is that something we can do?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you go further together than you can alone, I guess is kind of the idea, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, interesting. So yeah, I guess because I suppose the assumption would be that you as an investor are looking for people to show you how they're going to dominate that sector or that problem or whatever it's going to be. But it sounds like that doesn't always have to be the case. It's more about how you're going to solve this problem and what is the best way to do that, whether it's alone or collaboratively.
I mean, maybe the answer to your point around the depends thing is, in a lot of ways it can be both.
Yeah.
Sometimes, it's got to be a big, interesting, and meaty problem, and then hopefully you are building a category leading
Hmm.
business based on your kind of
Yeah.
differentiated solution. It's been said again a million times before, but I think the other thing worth thinking about in how one builds a category leader it's not always just that. Sometimes there are many ways to solve a similar problem, and the execution and how you achieve that is oftentimes critical. The best team picking from a few technologies that might solve the problem will usually
Yes.
uh, tend to dominate.
Yeah, and I wanted to come back to that. You mentioned this earlier that from a team point of view, you don't expect it to be the finished product, especially in early stage investments. And I guess, there's going to be, I suppose you expect a little bit of commercial naivety from research teams, and you don't want them to be completely naive, but they're not going to be the seasoned CEO who understands all the nuances of the market and that kind of thing. But clearly team is important, as you said. If you've got the best team, you're probably going to win. um so what, for an early stage investment, what is your expectation around that? Where, if they're not all the way there, which they probably won't be, where do you expect them to be, and how do you assess the team?
That's a good. That's a great question. I think one thing we tend to look for is the openness to build that team. If there's
Right.
kind of if there are individuals involved who perhaps you come with the naivete, but are perhaps less interested in 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 bringing in people who can either help coach them or help them learn faster, then that can be a bit of a challenge. There needs to
Yeah.
be if you're learning something new, you want those learning cycles to be pretty quick, and there are various ways to solve that, but you need someone who's open to
Yeah, I see.
becoming very good at something they haven't done before. And a lot of highly talented people who've done that in certain environments tend to think that it'll just come naturally to them in the next environment. It very well might, but
Hmm.
when you're talking about the timelines and risk of an early stage company, coupled with some measure of technical risk you may also be taking, oftentimes you want that you want that seasoned veteran, right? You want to
Yeah.
you could be top in your class at West Point kind of thing, but if you haven't really been out in the field yet, having a seasoned veteran there to tell you when to duck is usually a good thing to have.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose, this can be a bit difficult for founders to get their head around, and speaking as one myself in a slightly different industry, there's an emotional attachment to the business, right? And I think, but if you look in the cold light of day at what your job is as the CEO of a startup where there's 10 people and everyone rolls their sleeves up and you're kind of involved in everything, compared to 10 years later, perhaps a company that's NASDAQ listed and there's 1,000 people in the business and all that kind of stuff. It's just a completely different job, right? And it's a lot of the stuff you enjoy about this job over here probably doesn't exist in this job over here. But it's hard to let go for people. And I guess showing some willingness around that, maybe not letting go yet, but as you say, around taking advice and taking feedback and looking at different ways of doing things, it's probably a good sign to start from, right?
Yeah. I think to your point, sometimes people are very excited to evolve with the
Mm,
business, and some do it. And Emily LaProust at Twist is to me a prime example of somebody who
right.
just adapted to every new role that was needed of her. But that said, some people are just fundamentally not interested in being a public company CEO. They'd
Hmm.
much rather go back and get into those kind of early, gritty, busy early stages,
Yeah.
and I very much understand that. It's an exciting time.
Yes. Yes. I suppose you've just got to learn to let go if that's what you want to do, right?
Yeah,
But it's
yeah.
hard. And there was something else you said earlier that I kind of wanted to explore a little bit. because you've mentioned it a couple of times that one of the things you look at is actually not to do with necessarily what the company's bringing to you, but whether you can be a good partner for the company. Um, Tell me a bit about that. What does that mean to you? Where does that come into it? And obviously, I'm guessing that goes beyond providing the capital in the way that you're talking about it.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a great question, and I think in many ways a rich topic of
Mm,
its own, but a lot of potential sources of capital. How really do we bring value to a company? Are there things in our wheelhouse that we can use to bring our own sorts of de-risking? We generally tend to be a lead investor in the early rounds, so we're
yes.
generally taking a board seat. We're pretty involved, and our goal is to roll up our sleeves and be committed partners to the company. This is also a large part of why we tend to syndicate deals. If we have a team of hardworking people focused on a similar goal,
Hmm.
oftentimes the best idea wins, as opposed to perhaps if it's just one person. Even if you're right 90% of the time, you're only right 90% of the time, which
Yes.
can still be a bit of a challenge. So we think about trying to be, as we said before, there are going to be different things that different people on a capable board have navigated in the
Hmm.
past, be it past experience or areas of expertise. If we can help bring those, then that's something we aim to do. If we're looking at something and it's hard to see what kind of value we might particularly bring, then we're perhaps in just one more undifferentiated source of capital,
Yeah.
and that in and of itself, I think, kind of it's a much more enjoyable, fun, and productive relationship too.
Mm,
I think when you're learning from each other.
yeah, absolutely. And I guess, there is an element, and this has come through in some of the conversations we've had on this podcast, that you as an investor, you want to get involved in something that you're excited about, right? And that you think you can add value to, just as anybody does. And I guess it'd be a little bit boring to just give them the money and turn up every few months for a board meeting and not really be that involved in the success of the company. Being able to actually contribute like that is there's the emotional side of it as well as the return, right?
Yeah, I think life's too short to do boring work, kind of
Yeah.
thing. But that said, our goal is really not to strong arm the
No, no,
team,
no.
right? The people running the company are the people closest to the company and closest to the science, and
Hmm.
are really who we look to and trust to uh, 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 to drive uh, to drive things and to really tell us what's going on.
Yeah.
Our goal is really to be supportive and to bring value where we can, that hopefully is take some pressure off of people who are working 25 hours a day.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to wrap up, Sean, there's plenty more we could get into, but we're running out of time. What if you were passing on some advice, or perhaps if someone turned around to you tomorrow and said, "Right, Sean, from now on, you're the CEO of this company, and you got to go and raise some money." Given your insight into sort of the other side of the table, what would be the advice you would give? What would be the sort of one or two things that you'd really recommend to people who need to do that?
That's a good question. I would say uh, starting problem first, and maybe trying to dial
Mm,
in the kind of expertise of the people you're speaking with. No one's going to be as expert as the inventors and the people closest to the company. Some
yes.
people will have some degree of literacy, but bringing people along and kind of figuring out where about the depths of that literacy is oftentimes, I think, a beneficial thing to do. You don't want to waste a ton of your time talking about things that are kind of just generally known to people in the industry. On the other hand, you don't want to jump right into the weeds if you haven't yet kind of
Hmm.
surfaced why it might matter, if it's perhaps a more nuanced
Yes.
thing.
Yeah, makes sense. Fabulous. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us, Sean. Really appreciate your time and your insight.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Great to see you.
Thanks for listening. Outside of hosting podcasts, I'm the CEO of a company called Singular. We work with biotech businesses from seed to Series B to help them build a brilliant culture that delivers on their milestones. Come check us out at www.singular-biotech.com, and I'll see you next episode.